Hello, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Bruce Spittle, and I'd like to present an alternative view of the 8 rules of the School of Life established by Alain de Botton. Over the past 3 months, the Ocean View School of Life group in Dunedin, New Zealand, have been meeting every week or so to discuss the consolations of philosophy of Alain de Botton and the School of Life, and we have looked at Socrates on unpopularity, Epicurus on not having enough money, Seneca on frustration, de Montaigne on inadequacy, Schopenhauer on having a broken heart, and Nietzsche on difficulties. We've now started discussing the 8 rules of the School of Life. De Botton has seen educational value in the traditional methods used by the churches and felt they would be really good if they just jettisoned God, and has tried to introduce a modern educational equivalent using similar methods without God in the School of Life. He suggests the 8 rules of the School of Life need to be revised regularly, if not daily, at least once a week, and has produced a number of colourful videos with cartoon-like characters to assist the process. If we repeat something regularly, such as "Blessed are you among swin," the words can become part of us, even if they're not based on a solid foundation. Such as when we mishear something in the manner of "for handles," when "for candles" is misheard as "fork handles." And "blessed are you amongst women" is misheard as "blessed are you, a monk swimming." Prior to the Renaissance, many views of authorities, for example those of Galen in medicine, were accepted unthinkingly by many for hundreds of years. The spirit of the Renaissance was that we should dare to think for ourselves and form our own opinions. A motto for some institutions was "Sapere aude," dare to be wise, and meaning to dare to think for oneself. Using this approach, we can look at the 8 rules of the School of Life and imagine what the polar opposite for each rule might be, and see that a spectrum of views might be present between the 2 poles, and consider where our own position best fits on the spectrum. Looking then at each of the 8 rules, what might be the polar opposites? The first rule is to accept imperfection. The opposite might be to aim for perfection. Don't settle for less. The School of Life considers that we should accept imperfection. We are inherently flawed and broken beings. Perfection is beyond us. Despite our intelligence and our science, we are all, from close up, scared, unsure, full of regret, longing and error. Full of regret, longing and error. No one is normal. The only people we can think of as normal are those that we don't yet know very well. The alternative view is that as humans we have a great capacity to learn, As babies, we are unable to walk, but after 18 months to 2 years or so, we're able to toddle about on 2 legs. Later, we may be able to dance gracefully in time to some music. Although the capacity to learn new things may be greatest when we are young, even in our 70s we may still have the potential to keep learning. The B-flat chord on the ukulele may seem at first beyond what our fingers can do, but after a few months' practice, it can become easier, and after a year or two, something we are comfortable with, and we are ready to try to repeat the process with the E chord. Perfection may still be beyond us, but with 10,000 hours of practice at something, it may be hard to tell the difference. Our brains can physically change with doing something thousands of times, and we can approach so closely to perfection in a specific area, such as violin playing, that to a non-expert in the field it appears that perfection has been reached. Although we may be scared, unsure, and full of regret, longing and error with respect to a particular endeavour, if we stick at trying to improve in that field, our errors may reduce, and we can grow in confidence that we have some knowledge in the field and can contribute to it. If people had not persisted in particular fields of endeavour, such as William Wilberforce having a determination to make the slave trade illegal, or Herbert Needleman working to remove tetraethyl lead as an anti-knock agent from petrol, the progress made in these fields would probably have been slower. Having people set high goals and not accept imperfection can be very helpful for both local and global communities. Millions are thought to have died as a result of lead being added to petrol. Dedicated efforts by people striving to improve situations by aiming for perfection is much better than as a species our accepting our imperfections and not trying. To say no one is normal appears to be an idea with a weak foundation. If normality is seen to be what is present in, say, 95% of the population by definition, then most people are normal. If we think that having a secure attachment as an infant and young child is normal, and the abnormal situations are having an avoidant or anxious attachment, then about 60% of the Western population are normal. To say no one is normal appears to be using the word normal in a sense different from the usual one. The second rule is friendship, recognising that we are, each of us, weak, mad, and mistaken, should inspire compassion for ourselves and generosity towards other people. Knowing how to reveal our vulnerability and brokenness becomes the bedrock of true friendship, which we universally crave. People do not reliably end up with the lives they deserve. We should embrace the concept of tragedy. Random and terrible things can and do befall most lives. We may fail and be good, and therefore need to be slower to judge and quicker to understand. Be kind. The opposite pole to friendship is being unfriendly and seeing others as fundamentally different to ourselves. If we treat others as if they come from a different tribe, we can be cruel as a species in our behaviour towards them. We do not need to see ourselves as being, each of us, weak, mad and mistaken in order to act in a friendly, compassionate way towards other humans and animals. Being a human can be a sufficient reason to be compassionate and friendly to others. Recognising that animals have feelings is a reason to treat them humanely. Many complex relationships may exist between species. For example, the ant that pollinates the date palm may be one that has a unique life cycle that allows this. We need to be mindful of the complex relationships that exist in ecosystems and have some restraint from modifying environments unthinkingly with toxins. For example, in New Zealand, we are leading users of the poison 1080. We may still position ourselves at the pole of friendship, but the reason for choosing that position does not have to be because we are, each of us, weak, mad and mistaken. Although addressing slavery and lead and petrol have been largely dealt with, other issues still need addressing, and in tackling them we would be aided by having people working on them who have confidence that we can be strong, rational and correct. The potential issues include, firstly, reducing anthropogenic carbon dioxide to affect the climate. Is this a mass delusion not based on science? Secondly, tackling COVID with lockdowns and mandatory vaccination with, for many in New Zealand, if they wanted to continue in certain jobs, a messenger RNA vaccine despite concerns about safety. And thirdly, introducing mandatory fluoridation of water in New Zealand at 0.7 parts per million, despite strong evidence that damage to the developing fetal brain occurs with water fluoride levels of less than 0.4 parts per million, milligrams per litre, and that as with lead and mercury, there may be no absolutely safe level for fluoride in water. The third rule is know your insanity. We cannot be entirely sane, but it is a basic requirement of maturity that we try to understand the ways in which we are insane. We can warn others what our sanities might make us do early and in good time before we have caused too much offence. If someone asks or caused too much damage, we should be able to have a ready answer and never take offence if someone asks us, as they should. So in what ways are you mad? Most of the madness comes down to childhood, which will, in a way unique to our situation, have unbalanced us. No one has yet had a normal childhood, and that is no insult to the efforts of families. As noted, 60% of the people have had a secure attachment and have a good chance of forming a stable, rewarding relationship. We can have confidence that we have the potential to act in a sane, rational manner and can contribute to making the world a better place or adding to the beauty of the world in some way, such as with painting, literature, dance and music. The fourth rule is accept your idiocy. Do not run away from the thought that you may be an idiot, as if this were a rare and dreadful prospect and insight. Accept with certainty, in good grace, in full daylight, you are an idiot. But there is no alternative for human beings. We are on a planet of 7 billion comparable fools. Embracing our idiocy should render us confident before challenges, because messing up is to be expected. It should make us comfortable with ourselves and ready to extend a hand of friendship to our similarly broken and demented neighbours. We should overcome shame and shyness because we have already shared so much of our pride. The alternative is that we do not need to accept that we are idiots. We can see ourselves as having the capacity to learn and achieve our potential. We may have the capacity to become an expert in a particular field, and this is less likely to occur if we simply see ourselves as being an idiot. The fifth rule is good enough. The alternative to perfection is not failure. It is to make peace with the idea that we are, each one of us, good enough. We are good enough parents, siblings, workers, and humans. Ordinary is not a name for failure. Understood more carefully and seen with a more generous and perceptive eye, it contains the best of life. Life is not elsewhere. It is fully and properly here and now. Although it may be reassuring to see ourselves as being good enough, the reality may be different, and perhaps we should strive to improve. If the outcome of being cared for as a child is that 40% of people have an anxious or avoidant attachment, we should recognise that in this 40% of cases, the attachment was not quite good enough, and be motivated to improve the situation rather than just patting ourselves on the back and saying that we are good enough. The alternative to perfection may not be to say we are good enough, but to see that perfection can be approached more closely if we keep working on it. De Botton notes the view of relationship in the ancient Greeks was that virtues and perfection were highly regarded, and it was okay to keep working for a partner to get as close to being virtuous as possible, rather than it was okay just to accept being how they were with rough-hewn stages of virtuosity. The sixth rule is beyond romanticism. The one is a cruel invention. No one is wholly right, nor indeed wholly wrong. True love is not merely an admiration for strength. It is patience and compassion for our mutual weaknesses. Love is a capacity to bring imagination to bear on a person's less impressive moments, and to bestow an ongoing degree of forgiveness for our natural fragility. No one should be expected to love us just as we are. Genuine love involves two people helping each other to become the best versions of themselves. Compatibility isn't a prerequisite for love, it is the achievement of love. While it is laudatory that we are compassionate and patient with our partner's less impressive moments, we can ask if de Botton gives up too easily on the concept that sexuality is too difficult to be confined to a marriage relationship, rather than being relatively tolerant of affairs. He notes that marriage partners can be partners in crime, and people do not have to be either Madonna or whore, saint or brute. However, his comments suggest that the modern idea that sexuality should be confined to a marriage relationship, with adultery being frowned upon, may place too great a strain upon marriages, and we should be more relaxed about affairs. Some may see that adultery creates problems with a sense of trust in and commitment from a spouse, and be reluctant to give up on that ideal. Genuine love, with two people helping one another to be the best versions of themselves, is admirable. The seventh rule is cheerful despair. We are under undue and unfair pressure to smile, but almost nothing will go entirely well. We can expect frustration and misunderstanding. We can expect frustration, misunderstanding, misfortune, and rebuffs. We should be allowed to be melancholic. Melancholy is not rage or bitterness. It is a noble species of sadness that arises when we are open to the fact that disappointment is at the heart of human experience. In our melancholy state, we can understand without fury or sentimentality that no one fully understands anyone else, that loneliness is universal, and that every life has its full measure of sorrow. But though there is a vast amount to feel sad about, we are not individually cursed, and against the backdrop of darkness, many small, sweet things should stand out. A sunny day, a drifting cloud, dawn and dusk, a tender look. Despair, but do so cheerfully. Believe in cheerful despair. Although we can see great value in appreciating beauty in clouds, dawn and dusk, and a tender look, we can do so on the basis of cheerful optimism rather than cheerful despair. Despair suggests the glass is half empty, and optimism as it being half full. If we remain optimistic, we may have more inspiration and hope for working rather than working on a long-term goal, rather than giving up producing any change in the world. Although we will all die, before we do so, we may be able to contribute to helping in one way or another, and we can die with a sense of having made a small difference because we lived rather than dying in despair. The opposite of cheerful despair can be cheerful optimism, and some may prefer to be with optimists, able to express joy and be happy, rather than those who appear somewhat glum, heavily laden, and melancholic. As humans, we can share leisure activities such as outdoor walks, music, and dance, which can lead to a sense of optimism and community rather than despair and melancholy. And some may feel that the case for being at the despairing, melancholic pole is not strong. This is not to say that sad events should be brushed over and we should put on a happy face and smile. When sad events and losses occur, it may be best to cry for all of them as much as we need to, until we stop crying, and then we can begin to live and love again. Nietzsche favoured avoiding alcohol because he thought difficulties needed to be faced rather than blotted out with chemical anaesthesia. Similarly, he was not keen on the Christian approach, which he saw as meekly and mildly accepting that which was wanted but could not be achieved. He preferred people to work on their problems and overcome them in their own individual way, but avoiding reducing the consciousness of them with a brain depressant or by redefining them not as problems but as states to be welcomed and made peace with. It may be overstating the case to say that no one fully understands anyone and loneliness is universal. Some couples spend 50 years together and may come to think they understand the other person pretty well, and with that companionship do not feel particularly lonely. The eighth rule is transcend yourself. We are not at the centre of anything, thankfully. We are minuscule bundles of evanescent matter on an infinitesimal corner of a boundless universe. We do not count one bit in the grander scheme. That should be a liberation. We should gain relief from the kindly indifference of spatial infinity, an eternity where no one will notice, and where the wind erodes the rocks in the space between the stars. Cosmic humility, taught to us by nature, history, and always the sky above us, is a blessing and a constant alternative to a life of frantic jostling, humorlessness, and anxious pride. The alternative to seeing ourselves as insignificant is that we can see ourselves as being able to make a difference. And although it may be only a small difference, it is still something. A mighty river can be seen to be composed of many small drops of water. Rather than being overawed by our insignificance and being reduced to a state of despair and accepting our imperfections, insanity, and idiocy, we can have a sense of belief in our ability to make a difference in one area or another, and be motivated to continue to put in the sustained effort that may bring this about. Rather than being an alternative to a life of frantic jostling, humorlessness, and anxious pride, cosmic humility can coexist with a life of patient endeavour, a sense of fun in being able to enjoy beauty, singing and music, dance and company, and a quiet confidence. The presenting of this alternative perspective on the 8 rules of the School of Life. In doing this, I am not saying that any or all of the rules are wrong, but suggesting that each rule can be seen to be at one pole of a spectrum of positions, and that where our own individual views lie in each spectrum is assisted by our being aware of and discussing the alternatives, rather than just learning and repeating regularly, at least weekly, in an unthinking fashion, a mantra, similar to learning, "Blessed are you, a monk swimming." Thank you.